Beijing, 1905. A crowd is gathered in the public square, but this is no festival or celebration. The Qing dynasty executioner stands ready, his table arrayed with knives of different sizes, each sharpened to surgical precision. Bound to a wooden post is a man named Fu Zhuli, convicted of murdering his master. But Fu Zhuli will not die today, or tomorrow, or even the day after. Over the next 3 days, the executioner will make between 3,600 and 4,000 cuts on his body, removing flesh in small pieces, while keeping him conscious and alive for as long as possible. This is Lingxi, death by 1,000 cuts, and it represents the pinnacle of a Chinese tradition of punishment that spans 3 millennia and includes some of the most sophisticated torture methods ever devised by human civilization. Before we descend into the depths of ancient Chinese punishment, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our exploration of how the oldest continuous civilization in history perfected the art of making death last as long as possible. Now, let's examine 7 of the most sickening punishment methods used in Imperial China, techniques that reveal how cruelty can become both science and tradition. The first and most infamous method is Lingxi, which translates as slow slicing or death by 1,000 cuts. Despite its name, the actual number of cuts varied based on the severity of the crime and the skill of the executioner. This punishment was reserved for the most serious offenses: treason, patricide, matricide, and crimes that threatened the social order itself. It wasn't just an execution, but a public spectacle designed to demonstrate imperial power and deter resistance. The process was meticulously planned. The condemned would be tied to a wooden frame in a standing position with arms and legs spread. The executioner, a trained professional who had apprenticed for years to master the technique, would begin with cuts to non-vital areas. The flesh would be removed in small strips, starting with the chest, arms, and legs. Chinese medical knowledge, among the most advanced in the ancient world, was applied in reverse to ensure the victim remained conscious. Each cut was numbered and had a specific sequence. Early cuts would slice away flesh from muscular areas where blood loss could be controlled. The executioner would avoid major arteries and veins, using cauterization when necessary to prevent the victim from bleeding out too quickly. Traditional medical stimulants would be administered to keep the condemned awake and aware. Some accounts mention opium being given in carefully measured doses, not enough to dull the pain significantly, but enough to prevent shock from killing the victim prematurely. The punishment could be extended over multiple days. Between sessions, the victim's wounds would be treated to prevent fatal infection, a perverse form of medical care designed solely to prolong suffering. Physicians would attend the execution, monitoring the condemned person's vital signs and advising the executioner on how to proceed without accidentally causing death too soon. Photographs of Lingxi exist from the early 20th century, taken by Western observers in China. These images, among the most disturbing photographic evidence of torture in existence, show victims in various stages of the punishment. The photos reveal the precision of the cuts and the care taken to keep victims upright and conscious. The condemned person's expressions, captured on camera, show suffering that transcends linguistic or cultural barriers. The punishment ended only when the executioner reached the vital organs. The final cut would typically be to the heart or throat, a mercy that came after days of systematic mutilation. The body would then be displayed publicly as a warning. In some cases, the flesh removed during Lingxi would be sold as traditional medicine, with various body parts believed to have different curative properties. This commercialization of execution added an economic dimension to the horror. Our second sickening method is the bronze cauldron, a punishment dating back to the Shang dynasty around 1600 BCE, and used sporadically throughout Chinese history. The condemned would be placed in a large bronze vessel filled with water or oil. A fire would be lit underneath, gradually heating the liquid. This wasn't a quick boiling, but a slow process that could take hours, allowing the victim to experience every stage of being cooked alive. Historical records describe different variations of this punishment. Some accounts mention victims being placed in cold water that was then heated, forcing them to feel their skin gradually cooking. Others describe boiling oil, which would cause more immediate and intense burns, but would kill the victim faster. The choice between water and oil depended on how long the authorities wanted the punishment to last and how much suffering they wished to inflict. The bronze cauldron was sometimes used for political prisoners or those accused of conspiracy against the emperor. The symbolism was potent. Just as food is transformed by cooking, the traitor would be transformed from human to something less than human through this process. The act of cooking also had ritual significance in Chinese culture, and using these implements for execution was a deliberate inversion of their normal life-giving purpose. Archaeological evidence of bronze cauldrons large enough for human occupancy has been found at various sites across China. Analysis of residue in some vessels has confirmed their use for heating liquids to extreme temperatures. While definitive proof of execution use is difficult to establish for ancient periods, historical texts consistently reference this punishment across multiple dynasties, suggesting it was an established practice rather than myth. The third method on our horrifying list is known as the wooden horse or wooden donkey. Despite its innocuous name, this device was one of the most sexually degrading punishments in Chinese history, used primarily on women convicted of adultery or other sexual crimes. The device consisted of a wooden structure shaped roughly like a horse or donkey, with a large wooden or metal phallus mounted on its back. The condemned woman would be stripped and forced to sit on the device, with the phallus penetrating her. The horse would then be paraded through the streets, with the woman's weight forcing her down onto the penetrating object. In some versions, weights would be added to her feet to increase the pressure. The parade could last hours, with the victim experiencing not just physical pain but public humiliation and sexual violation. Some variations of the wooden horse included metal spikes or rough surfaces on the phallus, causing internal tearing and bleeding. The victim would be unable to lift herself off the device due to her hands being bound and the positioning of her legs. The longer the parade lasted, the more severe the internal injuries became. Many victims died from this punishment, either during the public display or shortly after from infection and internal damage. The gendered nature of this punishment reveals how Chinese society used torture to enforce sexual norms and control women's bodies. While men might be castrated for sexual crimes, women faced this degrading and invasive punishment that combined pain with sexual humiliation. The public nature of the wooden horse also served to shame the victim's family and community, extending the punishment beyond the individual. Our fourth sickening method is referred to as rib removal or bone extraction. This punishment involved the systematic removal of the victim's ribs while they were still alive. The condemned would be restrained face down, and incisions would be made along the sides of the torso. Executioners with surgical knowledge would then carefully cut through muscle and connective tissue to access the rib cage. Individual ribs would be broken or cut free from their attachments to the spine and sternum, then extracted through the incisions. The process required medical expertise because the executioner needed to avoid puncturing the lungs or severing major blood vessels that would cause immediate death. The pain of having bones systematically removed from your living body, feeling them crack and tear free, transcends description. This punishment could be extended over multiple sessions, with several ribs removed each time. Between sessions, the wounds would be cauterized and bandaged to prevent death from infection or blood loss. The victim would be kept alive to experience multiple extractions, their chest cavity gradually hollowed out, while their heart and lungs continued to function. Historical records suggest this punishment was rare, reserved for physicians or medical practitioners who had used their knowledge for harm, such as poisoning or causing death through malpractice. The symbolic logic was clear. Just as they had misused their understanding of the body, their own body would be systematically dismantled using that same knowledge. The punishment mirrored the crime with horrifying precision. The fifth method is death by bamboo, which sounds almost benign until you understand the process. This punishment took advantage of bamboo's remarkable growth rate. Some species can grow up to 3 feet in a single day. The condemned would be suspended above a bed of young bamboo shoots, positioned so that the fastest-growing shoots would pierce their body from below as they grew. The victim would be lowered gradually onto the bamboo field, or held in position as the bamboo grew upward into their body. Bamboo shoots are strong enough to pierce human flesh, and their rapid growth meant that the victim would experience being slowly impaled from below over hours or days. The pain would increase incrementally as more shoots penetrated deeper, and the victim would be unable to escape or even shift position significantly. This method was particularly cruel because it weaponized nature itself. The victim wasn't being actively tortured by human hands, but by the inexorable growth of plants, a process that couldn't be stopped or controlled once it began. The psychological horror of watching bamboo shoots inching toward and then into your body, knowing that each hour would bring deeper penetration, broke victims mentally before the physical trauma killed them. Historical accounts of bamboo execution are controversial among scholars, with some arguing it may be more legend than historical fact. However, bamboo's ability to pierce human tissue is well documented, and the punishment is mentioned in multiple Chinese sources from different periods. Whether it was commonly used or rarely implemented, the very concept reveals the creativity that ancient Chinese authorities brought to designing punishments. Our sixth sickening method is called death by tearing or 5 horses dismemberment. This punishment involved tying each of the victim's limbs to separate horses, along with the head or neck tied to a 5th horse. The horses would then be driven in different directions, literally tearing the body apart. The punishment was public and designed to be spectacular, demonstrating the power of the state to literally rip apart those who opposed it. The process wasn't instantaneous. Horses pulling in different directions would first stretch the body to its limits. Joints would dislocate with audible pops before limbs tore free. The victim would remain conscious through the initial stretching and perhaps through the first limb separation, experiencing their own body being dismembered while they still live. The horror of seeing your own arm or leg torn from your body cannot be overstated. Historical records from the spring and autumn period through the Qing dynasty mention this punishment for various crimes, particularly rebellion or attempts to overthrow the government. The public nature of the execution served multiple purposes: entertainment for some spectators, deterrence for potential rebels, and demonstration of imperial authority for everyone. The body parts would often be displayed in different locations as warnings. Archaeological evidence of this practice is difficult to establish since it leaves no distinctive marks on bones that can be clearly identified as execution-related. However, the consistency of references across different dynasties and regions suggests it was an established punishment rather than fictional exaggeration. The logistics of coordinating 5 horses in different directions required planning and practice, indicating this was a formalized execution method. The 7th and final method on our sickening list is death by insects. This punishment involved covering the condemned in honey or sweet substances and then either burying them up to their neck in the ground, near an insect nest, or enclosing them in a wooden box or boat filled with milk and honey. Insects, particularly flies, would be attracted to the sweetness and would lay eggs in the victim's body openings and any wounds. As the larvae hatched and began feeding on the living tissue, the victim would experience being eaten alive from the inside out. The process could take weeks, with the victim slowly consumed by maggots while still conscious. They would be fed small amounts to keep them alive as long as possible, ensuring maximum suffering before death finally came from infection, dehydration, or the cumulative damage of being devoured. This punishment combined physical agony with psychological horror. The victim could feel the insects crawling on and into their body, could see the maggots emerging from their own flesh, could experience the sensation of being gradually consumed. The helplessness of being unable to prevent or stop this process combined with the knowledge that death would come slowly over many days, broke the spirit before it finally destroyed the body. Historical accounts of this punishment appear in various Chinese texts, though its actual frequency of use is debated. Some scholars suggest it may have been more theoretical than practical, a punishment described in legal codes but rarely implemented. Others point to specific historical cases where individuals were reportedly executed this way. The truth likely lies between. Probably used occasionally for particularly hated prisoners, but not as commonly as quicker execution methods. What unites all 7 of these sickening punishment methods is their sophistication. These weren't spontaneous acts of violence, but carefully designed systems that drew on advanced medical knowledge, psychological understanding, and engineering skill. Ancient China didn't simply kill criminals. It created elaborate mechanisms for maximizing and prolonging their suffering. The bureaucratic nature of Chinese torture is particularly striking. Execution methods were codified in law, with specific crimes mapped to specific punishments. Executioners were trained professionals who passed their knowledge down through family lines or formal apprenticeships. The state maintained torture equipment and execution grounds, treating death dealing as an administrative function requiring proper resources and expertise. This systematization of cruelty reveals something disturbing about human civilization. The same organizational skills that built the Great Wall and the Grand Canal were applied to perfecting torture. The same medical knowledge that healed disease was used to prevent tortured prisoners from dying too quickly. China's achievements in art, philosophy, and science coexisted with these horrific punishment practices, reminding us that cultural sophistication and moral progress are not synonymous. The longevity of these practices is equally disturbing. Lingqi was officially banned only in 1905, meaning death by 1,000 cuts was still being practiced at the same time cameras and automobiles existed. Some of these punishments persisted for thousands of years across multiple dynasties, suggesting they were seen not as barbaric, but as normal and necessary parts of maintaining social order. So tell us, which of these 7 sickening punishment methods reveals the darkest aspect of ancient Chinese civilization? The surgical precision of Lingqi that turned death into a multi-day ordeal? The bronze cauldron that cooked prisoners alive? The wooden horse that combined pain with sexual degradation? The rib extraction that hollowed out living bodies? The bamboo that weaponized plant growth? The 5 horses that tore bodies apart publicly? Or the insect death that turned victims into living food? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this exploration of ancient China's darkest traditions has fascinated you, subscribe to continue our journey through history's most disturbing corners. Until then, remember that every civilization, no matter how advanced or cultured, is capable of normalizing extreme cruelty when it serves the purposes of power and control.